Hello and welcome to Political Paradigm. I'm Terry Ikumi. It's still politics season here in Nigeria. After that comes governance and then development. That's our talking point today on Political Paradigm. We'll also look at the recently concluded presidential and national assembly elections and make projections for the governorship and state houses of assembly elections. My guest is the Director of Programs for YAGA Africa. YAGA Africa has been at the forefront of governance and development in Nigeria. They also monitored the 2023 presidential and national assembly elections. Cynthia Mbamalu is my guest. Welcome to Political Paradigm. Cynthia.
Thank you.
No, I think it's not too late to say Happy International Women's Day, is it?
Oh, no, it's not. This is still the month for women, so
What?
thank you.
I'm just worried, I'm concerned as to how Nigerian women are perceiving this day compared to their counterparts. I'm looking at what obtains in Nigeria and if there's anything worth celebrating for Nigerian women. How do you think, what was the message to Nigerian women or how was it perceived by Nigerian women?
Well, I think for a lot of Nigerian women, there's still this, how I would put it, it's been a period of reflection for us because just coming out from a national elections and seeing how the numbers are for women, it's really low. For the National Assembly, at least, is really low. We are not sure what state assemblies the election would be like and the governorship elections. And so it's been a period of reflection because if you think around the state and status of women in the country, Nigerian women make up almost half of the population, about 49.6% of the population based on the last data by the United Nations. And when it comes to registered voters, they make up about 48.6% of the registered voters. This is still a good number compared to, if you think around that. But when it comes to leadership, political representation, we still have very few numbers of women, really low. In 2019, post the 2019 elections, the women representation for the Senate was barely 8 out of 109. In the House of Reps, it was 13 out of 360, and the state assemblies, 44 out of 990 seats. And we're hoping for something better in the 2023 elections, where you observe the primaries. I know Channels TV had lots of conversation post the primaries around even how the process in itself could not guarantee inclusion for women and for young people. And so the numbers did drop for candidacy. But post the elections, the numbers for that drop. For the Senate, so far, just 3 women out of those, because we still have some supplementary elections. But for the just 3 elected so far in the Senate and in the House of Reps, I think the number is 14 or 15, if I'm not
As it stands now, it's 11. No, 12 actually, because it's 15 in total.
Yeah.
12 in the House, 3 in the Senate.
Yes, 12, yes, yeah, because that was a number, it dropped by 1 from 2019. 2019 was 13. And so you can imagine that this result, we're discussing this in a Women's Month, and the question is how far have we come as a people when it comes to promoting women political inclusion and integrating women leadership as a core part of development and governance in Nigeria. And it's really poor. We're not sure if we should be in a celebratory mood, aside the fact that we're happy and appreciating ourselves as women. If you think around it, there's still a lot of gap when it comes to leadership inclusion. But beyond that, just the general status of women. If you think around the cases on sexual and gender-based violence, we've still had increase in reports and very poor framework or very poor institutional framework to really address the issues of gender-based violence in Nigeria. So we don't have justice in that space. We don't have justice when it comes to economic inclusion and empowerment because you don't have a lot of women performing in that space. And post the COVID, a lot of women-led businesses suffered some major setbacks. So generally,
but beyond the women who perform in that space, another concern is in terms of legislation and perhaps decision making that will sort of influence, positively affect the women who are affected by gender-based violence. The concern is that the women are not there. I mean, we just talked about 3 women in the Senate. And if you look at that number, those are largely inexperienced women. The experienced ones have now left. And then it raises the question, what will be the performance of women in the National Assembly, in the 10th National Assembly, and perhaps what kind of legislation will favor women? That will require a lot of lobbying for the men.
Yes, it will, because, democracy is a game of numbers. Same also when it comes to the National Assembly. The legislative arm of government is basically led by a majority decision informing whatever happens. And if you don't have the numbers, you struggle to influence decisions. And you made a very valid point. The 3 senators are first-timers. And for the House of Reps, most of the ranking members did not make it back. So you have a relatively new crop of women legislators in the House of Reps. And for policies, for legislations that require attention, if we don't have women occupying leadership roles in both Senate and the House to influence and lobby rightly, is going to affect even the quality of legislations that we have. There were proposals to reintroduce the gender bills that did not make it in the 9th Assembly once the 10th Assembly is constituted. But just looking at the numbers, it's worrying because we know that we don't have the numbers for women. However, for me, it's beyond just having women push for women issues. I think at this point, in our state, in our development, Nigerians, we need to have that point where we reflect and say, it's not just a women fight, it's a fight for the people. And this is when we are looking out for male allies in the National Assembly who would become the voice representing, or the voices representing the millions of Nigerian women to push for legislations that promote political representation of women, both elective and appointive offices, but also legislations that support women development. And at this point, we're not going to say it's just for the women in the legislative arm. No, we need male allies, but most importantly, we need to start promoting what we call feminist leadership. It's a leadership that is beyond gender. It's about individuals who understand the principles of inclusion, equity, equality, and justice, and how it affects development as a whole. And I think that is the next line of engagement. And I'm hoping that as the National Assembly, as it starts to take its own form, when they go for their inauguration, that the legislative agenda for the first year at least would have equity as part of the conversation.
So we have a lot of new lawmakers.
Yes.
A lot. So maybe this may just be the opportunity to push this agenda.
Yes, and I think also the diversity, because you also, if you think about the number,
political diversity.
Yeah, it's also an opportunity for us. We're believing, or I do believe that with the diversity when it comes to party representation, hopefully, they don't all start to cross carpet, because I'm looking forward to the 10th Assembly. I think it would be an interesting assembly to engage. That is an opportunity for us to make that entry point. First, we have new lawmakers coming in who may not have the biases and prejudices of previous lawmakers. They also have people who may be more open to learn and adopt learning as part of their leadership practice, and so they are willing to listen to different sectors or sections of the society, including women, and that also the diversity helps us get the votes we need across party lines, rather than where you have a dominant or almost just 2 parties to deal with.
When I was speaking about inclusivity, I know that the youth angle of things is another point to look at. And what's your statistics telling you with regards to the youth participation in terms of, with regard to the National Assembly? I know that there's a lawmaker in the House that is 27 years old. And I think that from what I have seen so far, the average age in the National Assembly is around 40, in the House of Representatives specifically, it's around 47 right now.
Yes, so we are still collating the numbers for age, because, you know, once winners are announced, they don't have the age attached. So we have to go back to the candidates list to pull out, unlike gender that you have male, female already disaggregating that. But we have a young 27-year-old who made it in. We've been celebrating that because that's a direct beneficiary of the Not Too Young to Run legislation, which basically reduced the age to 25 for House of Reps, which is why he could make that. But I mean, we already project that the numbers will be lower than the last time. Last time they had 13 of them who were under 35, but just like the women's story, the primaries were not really favorable to young people also. We expect more.
We have a lot of 36 and above.
36 and above.
Between 36 and
yes.
40, we have quite a number of them.
Yeah, but you know, we try to work with 30. The African Youth Charter, 35. The upper age limit is 35. However, when the numbers, because at this point we're having a debate just with my colleagues and said maybe we look at 40 and below, just taking into consideration our local context, the fact that we don't have a lot of young people who made it in. 40 and below is still young, but we're just saying that based on the African Youth Charter, 35 and below is the youth age. We expect more at the state level, actually. Just from our engagements, we worked with more youth candidates running for state assembly. But that is also going to be another issue. Interestingly, there's an entry point for youth engagement in the National Assembly. So, about the 8th Assembly, the Young Parliamentarians Forum was constituted, and we had that also in the 9th Assembly. Now, the Young Parliamentarians Forum is part of a global network of young lawmakers under the Interparliamentary Union, IPU. And that's, within that framework, the age of a young parliamentarian is defined as persons who are 45 and below. And so if we're working with the IPU definition on young parliamentarians, we would be working with 45. And we're hoping to support that process for the reconstituting of the Young Parliamentarians Forum in the 10th Assembly, but not just in the 10th Assembly, but also working with those lawmakers to move to the state levels too. Because we need to start building cohorts of young lawmakers across the different states just to strengthen that arm of government. We still believe that the state assemblies are not as independent and autonomous as they ought to be, especially in delivering on their core mandates of oversight, lawmaking, and representation. And if we can get it right at the state level, it also checkmates a lot of excesses when it comes to executive power of the governor at that level. So there's a lot of prospects. We would be working a lot more with 45 and below. So that's why we're adopting the IPU age, because, you know, we don't think the numbers are not good, 35 and below, so it's easier to work with. That way we work with more people, but just providing support to younger lawmakers in both the national and state assemblies.
Like you said, hopefully they don't begin to jump from one party to the other, because that diversity is very good for the country. Because I was talking to someone and I said, listen, choosing the leadership of this the 10th National Assembly, oh goodness, it's not going to be business as usual where you pull your party members together and have that conversation. Absolutely not. Yeah. But let's look at, before we look into the statistics of things, let's look at the outcome of the election, specifically National Assembly elections, and look at what could have been responsible. Yes, there's that. If we want to address the elephant in the room, some would say it's the Labour Party effect. It's that bandwagon effect that led to what we have. But then we have all the political parties winning elections. We have elected lawmakers from the NNPP, from the SDP, from the ADC, YPP. So.
Yeah, I think this election, identity played a lot of role in these elections. Identity, regional, ethnic identity, religious identity. And I'll just give you a simple example with Nasarawa State. If you see the numbers, or rather the parties that won Nasarawa, you find it interesting. You have SDP, PDP, and I think they had one APC or so. But I was just having conversations, just discussing Nasarawa, and there was there's this constituency, they voted for 3 different parties: President, Senate, House of Reps. And I found that interesting. And I just asked my colleague, because she's from, and said, what really happened here? I said, oh, basically all they voted for were Christian candidates, that for them, religion was on the ballot. So whichever party had a Christian candidate was a party they would vote for. And that is because of the, if you think around, Nasarawa is a unique state. It's quite diverse, ethnic diversity, religious diversity. So but they always have this Christian-Muslim dichotomy, in a sense, that it conflicts with a lot of decisions that happens in the state. And it's almost the same sense you feel in Plateau, where you have this challenge around indigenous settler conversations. And so it was interesting to see how the votes for Nasarawa, for instance, went. Basically, religion was on the ballot, and we expect that religion will be on the ballot for them when you go to the governorship elections and the state assemblies. But beyond that, if Kano was strictly on identity, honestly, if you think around the fact that, I mean, the APC did not get Kano for the presidential, it went to the NNPP, but if you see the legislative offices also, you see NNPP got a chunk, and we expect them to get a lot more numbers for the state assembly. It's also because if you follow the Kano politics, all I can say for me, it was about identity, not necessarily about a particular party, identity connected to personality. I don't want to go into all of that politics. But if you go across the different, we can't obviously neglect the role the Labour Party played, specifically because of the P2B effect. And I found, just following the results, I told someone there was a major positive in these elections. Regardless of all the challenges, this election was one of the elections I felt the power of the people spoke. because there are states you expect specific parties to win, they were losing those states. And states you expected specific individuals to win, they were losing out. It meant that the power of the people did prevail for some of those elections. And that is why we have such a colorful map, that you don't have one party dominating one region or the other, right? And that shows that our democracy is indeed progressing. We're getting somewhere. We're on the journey. We're not there yet. But I'm beginning to see people make decisions based on the things they hold dear. Hopefully, I hope it's beyond identity for the next elections. And why do I say that? Because when the focus is mostly on identity and each time we vote, it also gives room for it also puts us at a disadvantage when issues are not the driving force of the conversations that we have. And that is one of the things we want to learn from this election, which is why, if you follow the conversations post these presidential elections, there's a lot around ethnic. I think the division across ethnic lines and religious lines became a bit more enhanced, or it became a bit more pronounced in these elections. And post the elections, I know Lagos is where you have most of the conversations, but in different other states, there are lots of conversations around ethnicity, around religion. And it's become a bit more divisive than normal, which is why I'm hoping that the next elections, we're voting beyond just identity. Because as a people with a country with diverse identities, we also need to ensure that those are not the reasons for our decisions, but that issues are at the center point of every conversations that we have. The other point you made around the bandwagon effect, I think it worked out, because there were some individuals who won the elections who did not think they would win. And I remember there was a story of a lawmaker who they said, you won. He said, how? You know, because, if some of them did not spend monies to buy huge amounts of money.
Many of them didn't even campaign.
You know, it was just like, okay, I'm a candidate, I'm on the ballot.
Take my chances.
Yeah, take my chances. And, you know, before we knew it, the outcome just changed. That.
But that's not a good thing, is it?
Well, so now, two ways. There are two ways to look at it. The first part is when a political system is so exclusionary that it limits powers to only the select few who have monies. There's that part. The second part is also when our political system is not as participatory as it ought to be, to ensure that candidates focus on campaigns. And there are two different angles to that. The first part is, I wouldn't blame some of these candidates. For a lot of them, the newer parties were better options because they didn't have to spend much. The APC and the PDP, for their campaigns, for their party primaries, the high cost of nomination kept a lot of people out of the space. Aside for some women who got concession, but for those who even gave women concession, the women did not even emerge. So you could see that the system in itself was already limited to the hands of a select few. So only the power brokers and the money bags determined who won the candidacy for these two parties, which is why you saw the kinds of cases in court and some people who won judgment in court that we were questioning how that happened. So what that did is it gave others alternatives to go to the other parties. Now, on the other hand, there were individuals who, regardless of the party you're running in, you realize that it's a competition that requires you to actively engage your constituents during elections, regardless of what party you're running for. In that way, even if you're not running on the bigger names, you know, you are still engaging your constituents. Your people know you for who you are, and they can hold you accountable. And this is the part I'm a bit worried about, because for some individuals, they didn't really campaign. So their constituents do not know what their agenda is for the people.
Absolutely.
So how do you hold people accountable if in the campaign season
they didn't make you any promises?
No social contract. And so there was no promises. We don't know what you stand for. We don't know what you want to share or what your plan is for us. So how do you hold them accountable? I'm not saying this applies to all of them, because I know there were some of them who were still campaigning, even with little resources. They were doing like door-to-door
yes.
engagement, less media and more grassroots offline engagement. I know there were some people like that, but there were those who never really, because they just wanted to, they were just on the ballot. They never really campaigned. And it's the second part I'm a bit worried about, because when it comes to elections, it doesn't end at the ballot. We vote, but it's because you elect people to represent you. And the idea is, if it stops at the ballot, then it will not really be an election. Because the idea of electing is, I elect you to be accountable to me, which is why I believe it moves from the ballot to the next level of engagement, which is demanding accountability and holding people to deliver on the promises that they've made to us. And I'm hoping that for these elections, regardless of the low turnout, that Nigerians understand that the elections for Presidential National Assembly did not just stop at the polls, that the engagement continues post those elections. For the new legislators who got into the National Assembly, we also need to constantly now hold them to account based on our expectations from them as a people, because it continues post the elections. Yeah. For those who had nothing to tell us in campaign season, they can now go and meet their constituents.
Appreciate them and then make promises.
Appreciate them and set up town hall meetings and say, yes,
I think one of them said that.
Yes.
I think in one of the interviews we had at the ICC, one of them said that he would like to hold town hall meetings virtually every month to understand what his people's needs are. Yeah. And I think that's part of their responsibilities beyond lawmaking at the federal level. But I'm curious, these outcomes almost suggest that we may just be ready for independent candidacy.
Yes. And especially because you had people who won votes because of who they are, not because of the parties that they were running under. And I do think Nigeria is ready for independent candidacy, because it opens up the space for more competition. Election is about competition, but competition of ideas and policies and ideologies.
And perhaps reduces the cost of running for office.
Yes, because if people realize, I don't need to get millions,
I don't need to pay
millions for just nomination. I could just raise the millions for campaign rather than just spending it. Because, nomination is, it's what I always say is a bad investment, because there's no guarantee of returns. You pay, there's no guarantee you would be the candidate. Same also, but you still need to spend for campaigns. But if you have independent candidacy and you have a Terry, for instance, who wants to run for House of Representatives, you just need to save some of the salaries you've been making here and focus on campaigns. You go to your constituency, which may be 2 local government areas or 1, depending on how large your federal constituency is, and you focus your resources properly. I think it makes competition more interesting. But beyond that, it also gives voters better options at the ballots. Most times we're limited to the better of 2 evils. And I think that is not how democracy ought to be. Yeah. Let's make competition a bit more interesting, at least for legislative offices. Perhaps they could say for executive, it's a bit more cumbersome. But I do believe that it's time we start thinking around independent candidacy.
As we analyze the presidential and National Assembly elections, let me ask you this question. First of all, the civil society organizations have largely condemned the processes of the election. And in some cases, it's almost justifiable that there are dissenting voices right now. What's your reaction to the calls that the INEC chairman should step aside or be sacked? I ask this because in my interview with the civil society, Mr. Clement Wankwo of PLAC, he said that the INEC chairman bungled this election, that this was one of those elections that Nigerians were looking forward to, and this doesn't even come close to the minimum standard of an election.
So I may not go with the decision around sack, but I do believe there's a need for accountability. And yes, I do agree that the national chairman, the chairman of Independent National Electoral Commission, but it's beyond him. There's a national leadership and state leadership. But usually, you hold the head responsible. So I want to give a context, because so when people say, why are Nigerians complaining? The elections met some standards. I want us to appreciate why there's this level of dissatisfaction. I'm not talking about the results or the outcome, just the process in itself. Now, this is one election that a lot of Nigerians really looked forward to, especially for those of us in the media and civil society. Why? We had this long period of electoral reform where you had For the first time, it was not just media and civil society that were talking about electoral reforms. Nigerians, if you go on Twitter at the time, were talking about electoral reforms. Citizens got interested in the process, and there were important provisions in the bill that finally became law that Nigerians cared about, one of which was electronic transmission of results. And because a lot of people believe that technology would help promote transparency. So if you remember that when the bill went for voting in the House and the Senate in 2021, one contentious issue was INEC's power to transmit results electronically. And the National Assembly had said Nigeria was not ready. INEC had said, no, we are ready. In fact, INEC released this policy brief, which I know I read, and had shown it had done a national assessment, it has done infrastructural assessment to support this argument that we are ready for electronic transmission of results.
It made a presentation at the public hearing to support that.
The chair was further called by the House of Reps to make a presentation. The Senate's provision, if you remember that section, the Senate had introduced NCC in the provision, in the bill, and said NCC would have the power to determine when INEC is ready. And Nigerians said, no, you cannot subject the power of a constitutionally established body like INEC to an NCC, which is established by statute, right? And there was the Senate had voted, and there were protests. Nigerians were calling. Remember, there was a time the Senate president said, don't stop calling me, I have just one vote. Call your lawmakers. And that was the section that there was a recommittal, and they reversed their vote and edited it and took out NCC. So Nigerians believed that INEC was ready because INEC said we're ready for this. And they felt it was important. We felt it was important to support the Electoral Commission to ensure that power was guaranteed in the Electoral Act. So when the bill was passed, if you remember, there was a lot of celebration. You would think it was an amendment to the Constitution. But it was a legislation, right? People celebrated that. And beyond that, funds to the Electoral Commission was to be released 1 year to the elections. That was done. And the idea was if funds are released early, issues around logistics management, issues around procurement and operations will be handled in time. And I wanted to just give this context because we need to follow the journey from where we were and why the expectation was built. And BVAS was introduced as a game changer. IREV was said to be the other game changer. INEC had piloted IREV as far back as 2020. The first time was in the Nasarawa by-elections in 2020. Then Edo, Ondo, subsequent by-elections, Anambra, 2021, Ekiti, Osun, FCT, Area Council. And then INEC had even said, we've done it in over 100 by-elections. We've piloted this, we've seen it work. Nigerians saw it work. And we said we would have it for the national elections. So when people are frustrated that the IREV, which everyone looked up to, and the chair promised on several locations, you have a lot of records. I'm sure if you go through your archives as channels, you'll see several times when the chair said, INEC is ready for these elections, IREV would work, go home and download your polling list results. So when that particular aspect of the coalition process was not efficient or did not work, it created doubt. That is one. I just wanted to talk about the technology part because this is a major conversation. And why you have a lot of parties questioning the outcome was because there is now a perception, and you know for elections, perception is everything, that's the truth. There's now a perception that the process was fraudulent. That is why they did not have results. That is the perception out there. So no matter the justification INEC gives, that issue, you've created doubts.
And INEC hasn't given any justification.
Well, they had released the statement late into the night on Elections Day. After hours, the platform was supposed to be up, ordinarily on Elections Day, the platform ought to be up. Now, we, as Yaga Africa, we were on this platform. It did not come up until like 6 p.m. because we couldn't even access it. And finally, it came on. But the results of the presidential elections were not even uploaded. You had that for Senate and the House of Reps. The question is, these 3 elections were conducted at the same time. Results sheets are completed around the same time. So why could the officials upload 2 for Senate and House and not for the presidential? Because as at 10 p.m. on Elections Day, there were no results for presidential elections on the portal. That's one part. The other part, the statement released from INEC later in the night explained that the portal was not built, the capacity was not sufficient for a national deployment because it was used for off-cycle elections. And I do not think that is sufficient justification. Why? Because in the mock accreditation that was conducted on February 4th, 2023, INEC tested also the results portal, and there was a new URL created for that. And the idea was that INEC will be migrating from the old portal to this new portal, which has better capacity to cater for 176,000 plus polling units results. And also the chair, I remember the statement I said, this portal can take up to 100 million hits on elections day. Because the question was, if you have 90-something million Nigerians registered, everyone wants to go on the portal. How are you sure the bandwidth can, take care of all these high demands? And Nigerians outside the country would also be interested. And I remember that statement said it can take 100 million hits. And so if pre-elections, you've said the portal is ready, we are migrating, we have expanded bandwidth for processing time, because one of the things we observed in Osun was, as at 3 p.m. on the elections day, the system, there was a downtime on the iRev, and that was because the processing time was so low. It was the same capacity that was deployed in Ekiti, which was a smaller state that was used for Osun. And so INEC had to, the tech team in INEC had to work on the portal on elections day. So from 3 to 5 p.m., we couldn't really get results until about 7 p.m. And that lesson was for INEC to realize that you need to improve for the national. And they said they were ready. And I think that was a lot of these built expectations amongst the people. So that's one arm. The other part around logistics, which I felt was really poor. Before 2019 elections, the conversation while the election was postponed, we're all sleeping, we woke up and election had been moved. One of the challenges were issues around elections materials. They said the materials arrived late, and before they got to the states, deployment and all of that. The justification was the funding for elections was released barely months to the elections. This time around, the funding for elections were released early based on the Electoral Act. INEC had also said it would produce materials in country, and a lot of civil society partners commended that initiative because we've taken away one level of the hurdle, flights coming from outside Nigeria not being able to land. Now we're just dealing in country. As at last quarter of last year, non-sensitive materials, they commenced deployment of non-sensitive materials to local government level. And I can verify this because we had long-term observers deployed from end of November, and part of what they were to observe in each local government, we had 822 of them across the 774 local governments, was to find out if there were non-sensitive materials being deployed to the local government offices. By December last year, sensitive materials were already being deployed to the states. So those sensitive materials like ballot papers, result sheets and all were to be stored in the CBN, and the BVAS to be stored in the INEC state offices. The BVAS were deployed by January because there was a BVAS testing that was done January 4th to 11th, 2023. And so for all intents and purposes, election materials were in the states as at January. Now, the other part on the conversation was, towards the elections, the cash crunch, redesign of Naira, and INEC had said, we need resources. Some deployments would require cash payment, some electronic payment. And I remember we had meetings with the Electoral Commission, and the chair had assured us that CBN was providing them with cash to ensure that expenditure that required cash transactions would be catered for. Why would we have insufficient materials in some polling units? There were polling units where the ballot papers were either not complete, so they had to pause on the process to go get the ballot papers, or indelible ink, or this ink pad, which is what you need to, thumbprint. So there were some of these things, I think they were just a bit, you could not explain what happened.
What exactly happened?
And that is what you said. The Electoral Commission is here to provide responses to Nigerians on this is what happened across board. It doesn't make sense that people voted till midnight. Sometimes voting in some locations, counting happened as early as 2 a.m. or rather as late as 2 a.m., 3 a.m. Nigerians should not be punished because they want to participate.
I have also received messages from people who claim to have been disenfranchised. In their own words, they had to walk away because the process was too tedious and taking too long. And that would have to be put on the electoral umpire for us sticking with the scheduled timing.
Yeah.
But beyond that, there are some concerns as to these guidelines, these INEC guidelines that we talk about. No, INEC did not breach any law. it breached its guidelines. So what's the repercussion for that? Is it okay for INEC to, as Mr. Wanko put it, shift the goalpost?
This is an INEC's responsibility. Why? You cannot make guidelines and decide to step aside some sections of it. It also shows a level of impunity within the institution. So the Electoral Act gives you the power to make a guideline. You make your guidelines, and the guidelines uses words like shall. In law, the term shall is mandatory. It's not, okay,
optional,
we may not. It's mandatory. You make the use of the words shall. Now, this particular provision, especially when it came to the results management process, is not adhered to. And you do not think it's important to explain why. And let's bear in mind that there was no communication from INEC during the elections to explain that because of 1, 2, 3 challenges, we will be stepping aside a part of our regulation or a part of the guideline when it came to results management. We did not hear that communication from INEC. So we cannot be we can't have an institution created by law, guided and regulated by law, with the powers to make policies, deciding at its free will to absolve itself from responsibilities regarding respecting its own guidelines. That is where there's a problem. I think, I think INEC needs to understand is that Nigerians honestly just want answers to certain things. The guideline provides for results management, and it gives the officials the responsibility to take a picture of the results at polling units and upload on the result portal. At collation, it also provides that, in fact, it says where there are discrepancies, because at collation, the collation officers are to compare the manually transferred with the electronically transmitted. And if there are discrepancies, the electronically transmitted version was supposed to be used to resolve the discrepancy. Now, I know there's been lots of arguments around, was it mandatory? Didn't they have options for manual? The Electoral Act was not emphatic on you must do electronic. And honestly, this is what we do when we fail in our responsibilities. We try to create excuses. When we create excuses, we are not opening ourselves up to be held responsible for failures that we are responsible for. And as institutions in a democracy, an institution in democracy, accountability is a guiding principle. When you failed in one aspect of your role, explain to Nigerians, take responsibility for that failure, and take action immediately. The other part was when people make arguments around these results, upload and transmission. I also think they've forgotten the story, which is why I provided a context why a lot of people followed this result portal, because we all were part of the journey to its introduction in the Electoral Act and guidelines. But I also think there's a power in the Electoral Act, Section 65, gives INEC powers to review results. And it says...
At what stage?
It says where results are declared involuntarily or in breach of the Electoral Act, the guideline, or manual. In the guideline, INEC expanded on this provision and said where a report is made, the commission determines and reviews the results. So a lot of, for someone like me who was an observer watching, the moment questions of individuals started challenging the results or making questions around the collation process, what I was expecting was just to show that sense of good faith. The chairman, INEC chair, had the power under the Act to say, okay, we're getting complaints around this. We'll set up a committee to review results before the final declaration, because you know, state by state announcement is done. Before the final declaration, parties that are aggrieved make a report and will review on case-by-case basis. Now, it just shows, it may not solve the problem of everyone, but it just shows that you are a listening commission, because you already are aware that there was a part of your guideline that was not adhered to, even if you don't want to come out publicly to say that. And because you've created doubt, you need to take that extra effort or make that extra effort to show that we are willing to review stuff, because it's not just reviewing results declared involuntarily, it's reviewing results that are not declared in line with the guideline and the manual, regardless of the act, because that special section gives powers to INEC to review if the guideline is not adhered to, or the manual. If you read the guideline and if you read the manual on procedures, you would see the mention of IREV, the mention of electronically transmitted. And that, for me, that was a way to address some of the concerns and just show that there was that level of commitment to allay fears of individuals or parties or supporters who believed that the process was compromised. But sadly, that wasn't done. And I think the other part was communication was really poor. The Electoral Commission waited so long. One, the IREV was down. I don't want to believe that INEC did not know the IREV was down on elections day. I don't want to believe that, because if average Nigerians who tried to log in had challenges, it meant that someone in INEC knew that the IREV was not ready, at least by 12 noon on elections day. As early as 12 noon, a communication ought to have come from the Electoral Commission to say, we know voting is ongoing, results will still come in. However, our portal is experiencing 1, 2, 3 challenges. Results would come up late or come up later, and this is what we would do to address that challenge. Communication was poor. We did not have crisis management communication, and that was the only statement that came out. The Commission never made attempts to even hold a press conference to address the concerns.
There's something else that comes to mind, and it's generating reactions in the public space, and that's the voter turnout in this election. In fact, 27.05% compared to what people described as large numbers of people that they saw. And, the level of awareness for this particular election has made people question whether we are actually 200 million. Many had hoped that the census would have held to at least help, allay these fears, at least, make it clear the estimated figure. But clearly, that's not. In fact, we're here now that it may not even hold in March because of the governorship election. But what would the census have done, or how would it have impacted on this election?
Sadly, we're a country that we do not know how to count. We don't know how many we are. We don't know how to count our monies. We struggle counting our votes. We struggle counting everything. And no country moves forward without adequate and proper data, which was why a lot of people wanted the census to even happen before this year. Earlier, post-2019 election was a good time for a census, to have a sense on how many people, how many Nigerians do we have living at this moment. That's one. But sadly, that did not happen. The other point of reference is the voter register, because the voter register, reasonably, it provides that data on eligible voters, those who have registered to vote. I do believe that the voter register needs cleaning. We need a better audit of the register. Post-2019, there were conversations with the Electoral Commission for a national audit of the register to also...
Independent audit?
Yes, independent audit. I mean, the commission could be part of that, but it could be independent. I mean, in Kenya, they had reached out to, I think it was KPMG that audited the Kenyan register. The IEBC in Kenya had called, done this bid, and they had external auditors come do that. And why that is important is because we need to also ensure that we're truly 93 million on the register, because if we don't have an accurate number of voters, turnout would never be accurate figures, especially because the system is a bit more transparent in limiting multiple voters. So before, if you think about 2007, where someone could vote 3-4 times and fictitious people were voting, it was easy to say turnout was high. But what if now we're having now we're having a clearer sense of what turnout is like? Perhaps that's why the numbers are looking this way. That's one part. But the register, post these elections, I'm hoping that INEC sees this as an important next line of action, a national audit of the register. Let us clean it up. I know INEC conducts this, the ABS, the Automated Biometric Identification System, which is used to clean out multiple registrants and fictitious registration. However, that is not sufficient, because we need to properly audit the register. That's one part. The other part is around other factors that could have reduced the number or affected the turnout. One of them, I believe, is logistics. Because like you said earlier, some voters couldn't deal with the stress and they went back home. There were voters who went to polling units and couldn't vote, because our data showed that there were polling units where elections did not hold. And INEC never went back there to conduct elections. So there were voters who wanted to vote, who couldn't vote. I'm not saying that would have given us 50% turnout, but that it increases our numbers also. The other part is also around the trust in the system. Post-2019, we had, Young Africa had this voter turnout study, and part of our findings indicated that a lot of Nigerians that did not vote, they said one of their reasons was the fact that they did not think they had quality leadership, that government was not delivering to the needs of the people. So for them, why voting leaders if they would not perform? My standard of living has not improved, and why should I care? I'm my own government. Some people said, I provide my own power, I provide my own security, I provide my own roads, and I provide my own education for my kids. And so there's that thing around, if leadership fails, it also affects the trust amongst the people to even participate. Then the other part was the process, which was why a lot of people wanted this process to work. Because when the process is seen and perceived to be transparent, it inspires confidence in other voters that your vote does count, it matters that you show up, and that the process is not going to be tedious. You're not going to spend 20 hours just trying to vote. So if the process is also worked on, it also has this tendency to inspire. Because one of the things we're hoping for was that we may not have 50% on. I mean, our projections as an institution was not 50, 60%. We're hoping for close to 40-something, close to 50. Because the thing was, if you get it right in these elections, then for subsequent elections, you have a template, you know. You tell people, see, people voted, see what the process was like. You can change the process. You can change the outcome if you show up to vote. But now, you know, post that presidential elections, it's been difficult to even do voter mobilization for governorship elections, because you have a section of society who believe that they will not vote again because I came out to vote, it was stressful, and the process did not go as I planned, so why should I vote again? So you see, if we get process right, I also believe that it would increase the turnout that we're hoping for as a nation. But by and large, our numbers...
Even you were discouraged. I recall I saw one of your tweets where you talked about how you looked to the elections with a new sense of hope.
Yes,
and you were really disappointed at the outcome. So there are many like you. It's ironic that I have to ask you what must be done now by the electoral umpire to sort of encourage, especially young people, to come out again. And I say this because, with regards to development, states, assembly elections, and the governorship elections are more important to the people at that level than who becomes the president.
That's true.
So if they are discouraged about coming out to vote for the state assembly reps and the governor because of what happened at the presidential level, then we have a big problem on our hands, don't we?
Yes, we do. And you've put it rightly. The state elections, they are very important to the Nigerians, especially at the state level, because that's where development is closer or closest to the people. The governor, the state assembly. And we need Nigerians to engage in that process. In fact, we need better turnout for those elections than the presidential. But you said, what can the commission do? At this point, honestly, it's about crisis management, because the trust deficit is there. The broken trust, we can't do away with that. It's just like when you break a trust of a friend, you now have to work extra hard to end that trust, which is what the citizens expect from INEC, that at least in the next 7 days, INEC invests in communication, explain to the people the steps that have been taken to address the challenges from the presidential elections, explaining that IREV would work, because for some reason, IREV not working has taken over the situation than even late commencement of polls. So you can see that people actually cared about that portal. So the Electoral Commission needs to highlight those processes, that this is what we're doing, these are the things we have ready, and ensure that they work as designed. The other part is, this is time for, I believe that INEC needs that level of both internal and external audits of its processes, because we need to hold people accountable for things that did not work beyond the technology, as simple as logistics management. Why did we have these shortfalls? Why did we have this late commencement? Were people giving monies to pay transporters and they failed? Did people siphon some of the monies?
But that's the problem. The Independent National Electoral Commission hasn't talked about any of these things. Exactly. So the people are not aware of what happened and how the commission intends to address it going
Hence
forward.
my proposal that if they are watching, you need to speak to Nigerians. You can't just, because when you keep quiet, you let people fill in the blank spaces, which is why we're having misinformation and disinformation everywhere on social media and even online. Because INEC is not providing a counter narrative. You're not speaking, so you're not controlling the narrative. Everyone is defining the narrative. And you cannot be a silent commission in a large country with a vibrant citizenry. It is a country where every Nigerian has an opinion. Everyone has an opinion on an issue. So you can't be silent in a democratic system. You can't. And the silence is really worrying, honestly. So to speak to the people, that internal and external audit needs to be done, an investigation. But I think post the elections, there's a lot around reforms for the Electoral Commission in particular. And we need to also ask ourselves, do we really want INEC to remain that institution that has this broad mandate? INEC has the mandate for voter education, political party monitoring and registration, monitoring campaigns, administering elections, electoral offenses. It's just very broad powers, right? And we can't run this system like that. The Waste Committee had made proposals for the unbundling of INEC. That report is very important. We need to go back to that. Are we unbundling the powers of the Electoral Commission? I think that is something we need to start discussing. So we know that this commission is working on this and only this responsibility. We've seen it work in countries, even Kenya. By the time they had their last constitution review, they unbundled their Electoral Commission. I tell people that the Federal Electoral Commission in the US does not conduct election. All they do is campaign finance monitoring. Literally, that's all they do. So you could imagine that if countries, either as big as US or a neighboring country in the continent, has decided that we need, and this is not, I'm just giving two examples, most commissions, this is what they are doing. We think around that. The other part is around the power of appointment, because the Waste Committee had proposed that appointment of the INEC chair and commissioners at both the national and state level, that power should be taken away from the president. We also need to ask ourselves, is that not a way to go? Especially because we know that for some states, some appointments of some resident electoral commissioners were questionable. There were commissioners who had either partisan background or questions on integrity that were confirmed and deployed. And so, because issues around appointments also would address questions around capacity. And because we had this election with a relatively new commission, in the sense that we had new resident electoral commissioners, some of the national commissioners were new. This was their first national elections. So beyond just capacity was also around...
And with an amended electoral act.
An amended electoral act. We're testing new things. It's almost new people who did not really have the experience. And so for me, post the elections, there's a lot of work that we need to do around the reform of the Electoral Commission itself, because we can't live with these excuses again as a people, especially towards the next general elections.
You know, Cynthia, just before we go, when we were talking about development at the states and the importance of state assemblies and their governors, something came to mind with concerns with regard to governance. How can we improve governance? I look at the next president of this country and the responsibilities that lie on his shoulder and the expectations from those at the grassroots who fail to see that they should first respond to or talk to perhaps their representatives at that level before escalating to the president. And I ask myself the question, how can this new president work in a country where state assemblies had just rejected local government autonomy?
So first, the new president has a lot of work. First, I think the first work is trying to unite the people again, because if you think around it, this is a president-elect where you had more people vote for opposition than for the president-elect. If you put up the votes by the three major opposition, it's more than the number of votes that the president-elect won with. So you're thinking around, this is the context already. There's going to be that disagreement and a lot of opposition. So the first work is, how do I balance interest and how do I manage expectations and try to build bridges at this point? So he's a president that needs to invest in building bridges at this point across different sectors. The other part, I do believe that the president has that responsibility to initiate the conversation again around local government autonomy. Why? There are different ways to amend the Constitution. Bills can be private member bills. It can also be an executive bill. There is nothing that stops this process beginning again. We could try it again and see how it works. However, there's an entry point for local government elections, for instance. And I just talked about local government elections because beyond the governors and the state assemblies, local government is also very important tier of government. And if you don't have credible elections at that level, it also affects the quality of leadership at that level. The new Electoral Act somehow legislates for local government elections by making that mandate that local government elections will be conducted in line with this Electoral Act. So what it does basically is provide some form of uniformity when it comes to procedure. And if we go by that, then it also will promote regular or periodic elections at the local level.
Absolutely.
And so you need better funding for that to happen. But I think, lastly for me, after the elections, parties meet at different levels. So the president, as the leader of, mostly you have the president leading the party, should be able to work with at least the states that are now with the APC and build consensus with states that are with the other parties to have that local governance as a key, or rather as a key agenda in its administration. I do not think there's anything impossible with collaboration and building and coordination. And for every government that wants to succeed, they must invest in building collaboration across board. That's the only way he can achieve success.
Very important, especially with the state governors.
Especially with the state governors.
They seem to be the ones who still control the state assemblies.
Yes, they do.
Because there's no reason why state assemblies will shut down local government autonomy. It makes no sense.
Which is why we are telling Nigerians we can address this now. On 18th of March, go and vote, please, regardless of your anger. Vote in lawmakers that you know are reasonably independent-minded and would be able to stand up to the governor. If you have majority who can stand up to the governor in the state, you curb all these excesses. But when you have the governor controlling the state assembly, yes, it becomes a problem. So voting is one way to solve this particular problem.
Cynthia, thank you very much for your time, for giving me your time on Political Paradigm.
Thank you.
I wish you well. It's not easy being an observer at the time like this, right? Well, that's all the time we have on Political Paradigm. Thanks for your time as well. Do well to catch this episode and others on YouTube. Simply search Political Paradigm or go to channelstv.com. Go and vote. I'm Terry Ikumi. Goodbye.